Plainfield, Wisconsin, October 17, 1957. The cold came early that year. The leaves had barely finished turning before frost began to cling to the cracked windshields of the sleepy farming town's old pickup trucks. Most of the 600 or so residents of Plainfield had already shut themselves in for the winter. Deputy Frank Wardens arrived at his mother's hardware store just after 9:30 a.m. The front door was ajar, the lights were off, and there was no sign of Bernice Wardens. A slow dread crept over him as he stepped inside. The cash register was untouched. No signs of forced entry. Only one thing stood out. A thin trail of blood that began behind the counter and dragged out the back door. Near it, scrawled in a shaky hand on a receipt pad, 1 gallon antifreeze, Ed Gein, a missing woman, a trail of blood, and a name everyone in town knew, but no one truly understood. Sheriff Art Slay and Deputy Wardens drove straight to the Gein farm, a decaying property miles outside of town, hidden beneath skeletal trees and years of rot. The front door was locked. The house was silent. They entered through the shed. Inside, they found Bernice Wardens, hanging upside down, gutted like livestock, headless and bloodless. Her body had been methodically dressed. The way a hunter might clean a deer, they backed out, called for backup, and prepared to enter the house. What they found inside would shock not only Wisconsin, but the world. Ed Gein was arrested without incident at a neighbor's house that same evening. He was calm, even friendly. He admitted to killing Bernice Wardens and another woman, Mary Hogan, missing since 1954, but the case was far from closed as investigators cataloged the grotesque items inside Gein's house. Lampshades made of human skin, chairs upholstered with flesh, a box of reserved noses, skulls turned into soup bowls. They noticed something peculiar. Some bones were professionally cleaned, some organs preserved in medical-grade jars. This wasn't just Ed's work. Could someone else have been involved? Detective Marcus Lewin noticed inconsistencies. Some skulls had surgical cuts too precise for a man with no formal education. Chemicals found in Gein's home, including formaldehyde and bleaching agents, were only available through medical suppliers. A coded set of receipts found in Ed's home included a name unfamiliar to most: Dr. Eli Horseman. Horseman was Plainfield's mortician. Reclusive, polite, a model citizen, he had signed off on Augusta Gein's death. He had overseen dozens of burials in the same cemetery Ed robbed, and he had access to everything Ed shouldn't have had. When Horseman's mortuary was searched, police found preserved organs in labeled jars, human vertebrae fashioned into a chandelier, and photographs, black and white images of Ed Gein posing in skin masks and bone corsets, holding his arms out like he was modeling a new suit. Even more disturbing, they found a handwritten journal, the Orchid Diaries, a step-by-step guide on preserving human tissue, treating bone, and constructing usable artifacts of mortality. Horseman never reported Ed's activities because he was encouraging them. Gein, emotionally broken after his mother's death, had become Horseman's puppet, a test subject, a student. Horseman had viewed the crimes as academic research into death and decay. When Ed began killing, Horseman stepped back, framing before he could be exposed. Ed confessed the murders, the grave robbing, and even wearing the suit. But he never once mentioned Horseman by name, almost as if he would protect him. In one interview, Ed muttered, "He showed me how, said I could bring her back if I stitched just right." But there wasn't enough hard evidence to prosecute Horseman. The photos were ruled inadmissible due to chain of custody errors. The journals? Branded fiction. Ed Gein was declared legally insane and committed to Central State Hospital for life. Doctor. Horseman moved out of Wisconsin 6 months later. He disappeared from the public eye. Some said he died in Europe. Others believed he changed his name and continued his experiments elsewhere. Gein died in 1984. His story became folklore, fuel for horror films and novels. But behind the Hollywood myth, a darker truth remained. He wasn't the only monster in Plainfield. And maybe not the worst one. In 1997, a demolition crew tore down the old Horseman mortuary to build a grocery store. Beneath the foundation, they found a sealed steel box. Inside were Polaroids from the 1950 as several face masks, preserved in wax-safe. Final entry from Horseman: "We were never butchers. We were curators, and everybody told a story no one wanted to hear.
They said the horrors of Plainfield ended with Ed Gein's death. But evil, when cultured carefully, doesn't die. It evolves, adapts, and hides in plain sight. When the steel lockbox was found under the ruins of Horseman's mortuary in 1997, it reopened a case that authorities had quietly buried. Inside were anatomical masks, surgical sketches, and photographs of Gein in disturbing, ceremonial poses. The last journal entry simply read, "They called me a butcher." But I was an archivist. Death has patterns, if you know where to look. And then, in a different ink, one final line, "Legacy doesn't rot. It grows." Fargo, North Dakota, 2001. A series of break-ins at local cemeteries had authorities puzzled. But things turned grim when a farmer found a skinless torso posed upright in a field, arms stretched like a scarecrow. The face had been removed. The organs missing. Investigators thought it was the work of a sadist. But forensics found something unsettling: clean anatomical cut traces of old embalming fluid and preservation stitching not used since the 1950s. Next to the body was a wax-sealed envelope. Inside, a photo of Ed Gein, a faded clipping about the butcher of Plainfield, and a single typed phrase: "I was not his only student." Retired detective Marcus Lewin, now in his late 60s, was called in to consult. He hadn't heard the name Horseman in decades, but he never forgot it. He returned to the mortuary's case files and found a lead he had overlooked: a 1956 letter from Horseman addressed to an Austrian medical journal. The recipient? A Dr. Jakob Haver, head of anatomical studies in Vienna, a known collector of preserved human specimens. That journal had been shut down in 1962 due to ethics violations. Lewin flew to Vienna and met with an archivist who revealed that Dr. Haver had indeed corresponded with Horseman, and even visited Plainfield in 1955, Ian Haver's old lab, now a university exhibit. Lewin discovered sealed crates that had never been opened. Inside were human bones, preserved masks, and surgical instruments, all tagged P56, Plainfield, 1956. The horror hadn't stopped. It had spread to in 2003. A joint investigation between Interpol and the FBI uncovered an underground medical network referred to as the Orchid Circle, a secret society of anatomists, morticians, and collectors with a fascination for preserving and repurposing human remains. The center of the network's founding documents was a familiar signature: E. Horseman. MD. The group operated in shadows, trading artifacts, detailed preservation guides, and even living apprenticeships. These were not just grave robbers, they were disciples of a twisted belief: death is an art, and flesh is the canvas. Through encrypted servers and pseudonymous logbooks, investigators found chilling references: the Madison pattern, Wisconsin stitch. Legacy of the Butcher King. One name appeared often: Dr. Elias V., believed to be Horseman's last known protege, Portland, Oregon. 2005. A medical student reported her landlord for suspicious activity. When police entered the basement of his Victorian home, they discovered what came to be known as the rebirth room. Lined with wax-sealed anatomical sketches and taxidermy equipment, the room contained 2 human torsos posed in anatomical display, skin removed but preserved to near perfection. Among the disturbing items, an armchair upholstered with facial skin, a cabinet of labeled fingers, a photo of Horseman, dated 1961, signed, "To my successor, E.V." The landlord's name? Dr. Elias Werner, a quiet pathology professor who vanished 2 days before the raid. Authorities believed he had fled the country. Detective Lewin, now suffering from cancer, insisted on making one final contribution before retirement. He released a statement to the press: "We all made a mistake thinking Plainfield was the center of the story. It was just the seed. The orchard is much bigger." That night, he received a package at his home. Inside was a leather-bound copy of the Orchid Diaries, newer, thicker, and updated. On the inside flap: "Your legacy is admired, Detective. Thank you for keeping it alive." A.V. Lewin died weeks later. The FBI reopened the case under the codename Operation Black Petal. Today, many believe Horseman's teachings live on, not in books, but through fleshcrafters operating in private black markets around the world. In 2020, a body was found in Amsterdam posed exactly like Bernice Worden's. In 2023, jars of preserved human hearts were discovered in an abandoned clinic in Argentina. Each case bore a calling card: a white orchid pressed in wax. Ed Gein's myth became horror movies. Horseman's legacy became an underground religion. One man wore skin, the other taught why, and now, in shadows across the world, the so-called archivists of death continue the work, with new students. Subscribe for more chilling true crime content.